Recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this most interesting meeting. This first question is for Mr. Greenwald. It's been said about the Newspaper Preservation Act passed back in 1970 that it was removing those so protected from the judgment of the marketplace. It's also been said that it failed to prevent abusive tactics, failed to help the smaller papers, did little to improve the quality of the opinions and writings of newspapers. Can you share with me the difference between that act, the Newspaper Preservation Act, and the bill that we're discussing today?
Well, I think that this goes to the comment that Chairman Cicilline made after the last time I spoke about how more and more people are consuming news than ever before. And I think that if you ask people inside the news industry, virtually everybody will acknowledge that the reason for that is because of what was essentially a sugar high of the last 4 years being one of the most polarized eras in American history because of the person who was occupying the Oval Office being so controversial. And that prior to that, there was a significant decline in the number of people who were trusting and consuming news content. Ratings were collapsing, local papers were losing subscriptions, people were talking about the New York Times going out of business, and there was a kind of temporary event that intervened to save the news industry. Then that sugar high is now gone. And if you look at data, there's no question that more and more people, more than ever before, distrust the media precisely because so much of the disinformation, conspiracy theories, and falsehoods come not from newly created sites online, but from the very industry that this bill would essentially empower by enabling them to act as a consortium.
Thank you. I'm not sure I heard an answer to my question there, but I'm going to go to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, it's been reported in the press that you were personally involved in the discussions with the officials in Australia, including the Prime Minister. What were your takeaways from your involvement, and that you think might be most relevant to the issues we're discussing today?
Well, thank you. I actually think that there's some important takeaways from Australia that are very relevant to the conversation taking place. And I'd actually go back to what Mr. Issa asked, is this about picking winners and losers? And I would say, no, it is not. Basically, Australia was addressing an issue similar to the United States. The reason that publishers cannot negotiate collectively is because of laws passed by Congress, the Clayton Act and the Fair Trade Commission Act. And so what Australia did was give the publishers the ability to negotiate collectively. And so that's what this Congress would do. It would, Mr. Issa, going back to your point, by passing the JCPA, not pick somebody new, but address the unintended consequences of what Congress did in the past when it crafted antitrust laws that got in the way of these collective negotiations. Now, the other thing that I think is very interesting and relevant from Australia is this. What we're finding is that the big publishers are not interested in negotiating collectively. The 3 largest news organizations in Australia are all negotiating separately. It is the small publishers that are negotiating collectively. And I basically believe that if this Congress passed the JCPA, you'd have 4 years to test the situation, but in all probability, that's what you would find here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Issa.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on exactly what you said. Let's presume for a moment that we like this bill and we were going to pass it. Is there any reason that you wouldn't limit the collectives to companies that would be under a certain amount of size? In other words, limit it to those who inherently have limited market power, because here the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and others probably would turn away and say, no, we've got that handled.
If that is an issue that concerns you, I think that there are 2 alternatives to address it. One is to pass the bill as drafted, and you have 4 years, and then it expires or you renew it. The other is craft some exception so that it only applies to, say, a publication below a certain revenue threshold. Either way, I think you are accomplishing what I believe is your fundamental goal, which is to enable the small publications of the country to be able to negotiate collectively.
Well, you know, there's no smaller business in most cases than a recording artist. So let me ask one quick question.
The time of the
I
gentleman
would
has
love to have, but
expired.
we'll to be
Maybe someone
continued.
else can yield their time, but.
Thank you, Mr.